The new Powder Keg Mine map in Overwatch not only introduces a brand new game mode to Stadium, it is also packed with Overwatch lore, including a hint at a future hero. Let's have a look. This video is brought to you by Turtle Beach, my favorite mouse and headset. Check out the links in the description and use code DMZ to get 10% off on your next mouse, keyboard, or headset. Season 18 of Overwatch 2 introduced a new game mode to Stadium, Payload Race. In that mode came with two maps, Team's District and Powder Keg Mine. Now, beyond it being a map for a new game mode, that last one also seems to be stacked with all kinds of lore. Overwatch lore, pretty current lore. Let's take a tour. Welcome to the Powder Keg Mine. It is set around the corner of Route 66 apparently, but there's not much of a reference here except for the typical rocks that you see here. Oh, some of these trees are clipping through the rocks. It kind of reminds me of Zion in Utah, where I used to be, but this is set in Colorado, around Grand Mesa. Some beautiful views. And look at that. That looks like someone has been experimenting with some dynamite right there. You got the typical floating platform of the audience waiting for someone to get killed, and yeah, this whole thing. Because it is a stadium map. So it is the first payload race map, and this is the payload that you'll be racing. There's one on either side. I have no idea what it is supposed to be, but it looks ready to go. Look at it, puffing, huffing. But before we follow the trail, this place looks like a workshop, and it was called Fred's. Fix It Fred's, which is funny because Fred is the other name for Bob that we get during the April Fool's event. She occasionally calls him Fred by mistake, and this might have been where she got the inspiration, but it was changed to Fix It Frankie's. It's now Frankie's place, and it was recently painted. Frankie is actually one of the founding members of the Deadlock gang. She's a hacker, and we got to meet her in one of the short stories that they released a few years ago. We haven't seen her yet, so we only read about her. This is a workshop. Like I said, founding member of the Deadlock Rebels, and using genuine Omnic parts, because the Deadlock Rebels are very fond of Omnics. They have a few Omnic members, including Bob, but a few others. All of these maps are mirrored, so the payloads are kind of following an identical route on the west and east side. This is the west side. And then you have this central part, which features a big tower at the end, just under the stadium, I don't know what to call it, camera rig. It says Powder Keg Gold Mine. It was a gold mine apparently. Pretty impressive structure. It allows you to go underground a little bit and to look into the mine. Look at that. The carts are still in there. They don't go far though. Yeah, we're not supposed to see this, but and a nice view over the valley. Look at that. That is impressive. That is beautiful. The more important part of this structure is actually on top. There's a tower that was probably used to kind of get all the ore out of the mine. Now it seems to be holding cables that are more of an electrical nature, because there's a huge telescope on top of this thing that they apparently stole from a Horizon lunar colony. I don't know if it's the big one that we used to see on the map, but yeah, the Horizon telescope was repurposed and is now property of the Deadlock Rebels. Now you might think that it's being used to watch into space, but it isn't. As you can see, there are a few structures there in the distance. You can see something right there on that rock. There's like a satellite dish, and then way beyond that there's an even bigger structure. You see these two wheels turning around, almost looking like fans. There's also an antenna. So something is afoot right there, and they're keeping an eye on it. Well, supposedly, because this guy seems to be off fetching some coffee for his donut. And those cables lead all the way in there. But before we check out that building, let's have a look at the other side. There's Cold Hard Trash, which is also a workshop, but it is of a very different kind. It seems that someone has a bit of an art side. Sure, there are some weapons that are being fine-tuned and whatnot. There's all the gear to do so, but then there's also this art, trash art, basically. A huge bird. I think it is supposed to be an eagle. And this improvised Omnic made out of gears, all types of trash, metal. And he looks angry. like an angry farmer. And yeah, it seems that whoever owns this workshop is very much into making that type of art. I like it. There's also an improvised bike. I don't think you're going to get far with this one, but you know, it's the idea. And on the other side, there's a work in progress, let's call it, with mirrors. I don't know what that is supposed to be, but... And this is the other spawn. Like I said, everything's mirrored. The other payload. Just as enthusiastic. Anyway, so you have this structure in the middle. The barrels. No trespassing. Well, we're not going to listen to that. I don't think there's anything inside here. I think that is just the engine. And if you go in here, you can see that indeed they're surveying that structure that we saw in the distance with the two big wheels. But even beyond that, they're keeping an eye on a lot of stuff. That is some high-tech gear for a bunch of rebels, like they call themselves. But that's not all of it. This is just an intermediate station. Because if you go deeper in, so on both sides you have the very familiar gates that you also see on Route 66. With, well, this is the first checkpoint. So if we go through that gate, you enter one of those caves that we also see on Route 66. And these caves are also holding some interesting little tidbits of lore. So there's all kinds of crates with bombs. Then you have this storage where they keep more bombs. TNT. You can go up here. There's even rockets. The same ones that we've seen on Route 66. On the other end, besides more dynamite and bombs, there is a secret stash that is the property of Ash. I think she got some inspiration from the Junker Queen, but behind there, she's working on a bike, her hover bike. That actually was stolen by Cassidy at some point, but I guess she got it back and she's fixing it. But very sneakily. Nobody can get in. This is her little private workshop. Now if we go in, I love this one. Coffee, you can sleep when you're dead. Sometimes it feels that way. This is where you get your coffee, the donuts. On the other end, there's some filing cabinets, I presume, and a dartboard that shows the disdain for the Helix Securities. So this is Farah's faction, that is what Farah is a part of. But they're not a fan. And in a few seconds we're going to learn why exactly. Well, not exactly why they're not a fan, but why they're focusing really hard on Helix Securities. Yeah, there's some more Deadlock Rebels spray art, but yeah. That seems to be their way of claiming anything. They just kind of put their tag on it and that's it. But yeah, this is the end station where all that information that we saw earlier is kind of gathered. You see those same screens. However, they seem to be monitoring the inside, so it seems they have some cameras on the inside, or they hacked some of the security cameras. And then there's this whole blueprint for Watchpoint Grand Mesa, which is the thing that we were looking at. That turns out to be the former Overwatch base that is now owned and run by Helix Securities. Now, this base was known to be working on some experimental weapons, and the first time that we ever heard about Watchpoint Grand Mesa was back when they introduced Soldier 76. There was an article, there was a piece of lore that said that someone had stolen a pulse rifle from the Grand Mesa without killing anybody. There were some minor injuries, but that person managed to get away with a pulse rifle, which is Soldier 76 weapon. And we all know who Soldier 76 is, so yeah, he knew where to look, he knew how to get in, he knew to get out without hurting anybody. Now the Deadlock Rebels are actually also contemplating stealing some of those weapons, so they're having a huge plan. You see where the serum storage, that is kind of interesting. They seem to be very focused on the serum. You have to watch out for the lasers. There's apparently a dropship somewhere around here. There's a charge port that they can use to upload malware. They're trying to figure out if Bob can squeeze in somewhere. Change of the guards. You know, the typical things you need to kind of break into a base like this that is embedded in a rock. It's not going to be easy, but they seem to have a plan. They're not using weapons though, which is kind of a waste because they have plenty of them. You would think that that is interesting by itself. So that they're planning to break into this space, that this is the place The soldier got this weapon, but it gets even more interesting. There's a memo right here that they managed to steal from, I don't know, someone at Helix Securities. And there's a lot of redacted text on purpose, because I think this is a hint towards a future hero. So let me read it out for you. Notice of transfer. Agent X is being stationed at Watchpoint Gran Mesa with the intention of taking over the role of Chief of Security. Effective immediately, X surpassed performance records in all physical tests and has proven to be an asset to Helix Security. X performance in X demonstrates great leadership potential. X quickly thinking led to success in the X recovery of Mission X, as well as the safety and the security of civilians on site and Helix trainees XX and X. X will arrive at Gran Mesa on XX, at which point XX will provide security clearance, initiate handoff proceedings, and perform mandatory X training. Signed, X Chief of Staff. PS, a farewell party for X being held at X. The XX cake options include X and Black Forest. I don't know why the cake options were excluded or redacted, sorry. It seems that they're hinting at someone right here that is going to take over Helix Security for this base. That is going to be the new leader for this base. Working for Helix Securities. Now, who could that be, and who is the current leader? That seems to be the things that they're hiding. Besides the cake, is who is the new person going to be? Who is the old person? Who did he save? All of these names seem to be redacted. And one person I can think of that they have been hinting at in a lot of different stories and a lot of different elements within the developing lore of Overwatch right now is Emre. Emre has left Overwatch quite a while ago. The fact that they chose themselves over and their personal grievances with each other over the common goal was something that pushed him away. I don't think he just kind of slowly disappeared in the background and started, I don't know, a beet farm or something. I think he is still very active, and he might have decided to side with Helix Securities. It might be someone else, but my guess is that they're hinting at Emre right here, that this little piece of lore is about Emre. We'll probably find out in the next months on what they're exactly doing right here. But I love that this map, this tiny payload race map that is set on a location that is fairly familiar, actually turns out to provide a lot of lore, a lot of interesting information, not only about the Deadlock gang, but also about Helix Securities, about the possible fate of Emre, about the fate of the telescope that used to be on Horizon Lunar Colony. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure that it is the big one that was in the hall. I think it is a smaller type, but it definitely was stolen from Horizon. I don't know how they did it, how they got it from the moon, but they're using it to spy on former Watchpoint Gran Mesa. And apart from that, it's just a beautiful looking map. And that was it for the Powder Keg Mine, stacked with gems. I like it, but interestingly enough, this story seems to continue on the other map, Thames District, albeit with a different faction. But I'll make a separate video on that later this week. However, it is clear that Overwatch is moving away from the Omnic Crisis storyline, and that they're kind of pushing a more classic factional-driven story, where the goals and the politics of the different factions are putting the spotlight on a very different take on this world. One that is, well, let's say in the first instance, feeling a lot less dramatic than having another Omnic uprising. But on the other hand, it's going to be a lot more fun for us to discover. But anyways, who do you think is kind of redacted on that Helix Security file? And what were the other two types of cake that we're going to have at the party? Let me know in the comments, or come tell me during my streams over on twitch.tv/DeemziesTV. See you there. For now, however, that was it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It always helps me out. I also want to thank my patrons and YouTube members. You too can become a member over on patreon.com/theomnicpost and right here on YouTube to unlock exclusive rewards. If you have a few minutes left, maybe check out one of my other videos. But above all, take care of yourself, take care of each other. Bye bye.